What happens when a 46-year-old man, his wrists wrecked by arthritis, his body beaten from decades of punishment, decides he's not finished? By the early 1970s, hockey had moved on. Bobby Orr had taken over as the face of the game. The new generation was here, and Gordie Howe was supposed to be a relic, already in the Hall of Fame. His number retired, his story complete. 4 Stanley Cups, 6 MVPs, 6 scoring titles, 20-plus seasons as the most respected and feared man in hockey. What more was there to prove? And yet, while most men his age were worrying about bad backs and fading hairlines, Gordie laced up his skates again. Not for nostalgia, not for a farewell tour, but to compete, to dominate. And then, the impossible happened. Against players half his age, some literally younger than his own sons, Gordie Howe scored 100 points in a single season. How did a poor farm kid from Saskatchewan, who learned the game with tree branches for sticks and frozen ponds for rinks, rise to become the most complete hockey player the sport had ever known? To understand that, we have to go back to where it all began. The prairie kid Gordie Howe was born on March 31st, 1928 in the tiny farming community of Floral, Saskatchewan during the Great Depression. His family soon moved to Saskatoon, where he learned the values that would define his life: humility, hard work, and toughness. The Howes had almost nothing, but they had determination. Gordie's father, Ab, worked whatever jobs he could: construction, hauling freight, anything to keep food on the table. Gordie learned early that nothing came easy. Every meal was earned through sweat and perseverance. Those long, brutal winters became his training ground. His first real pair of skates didn't come from a store, but from a pile of discarded gear a neighbor gave away. They were too big, so he stuffed them with socks and spent every waking moment on frozen ponds. Out there, no referees, no coaches, no rules. He learned how to protect the puck with strength and balance. He discovered that every stride mattered when you were skating for hours in the cold. That efficient, practical style, born out of necessity, would become his secret weapon later on. A star in the making by 15, Gordie's raw talent had already caught attention beyond Saskatoon. He was invited to a New York Rangers tryout camp in Winnipeg, hundreds of miles from home, farther than he'd ever traveled. When he got there, he was intimidated. The other kids had full sets of professional gear. Gordie had mismatched, borrowed equipment. He even had to watch others to figure out how to put it on. Still, the scouts noticed his rare mix of size, skill, and toughness. But the Rangers never followed up, a mistake that would haunt them for decades. Detroit, however, saw what others missed. Scout Fred Pinckney invited Gordie to a Red Wings camp, and within 2 years, an 18-year-old Gordie Howe was playing in the NHL. His debut came on October 16, 1946, against the Toronto Maple Leafs. In his very first game, he scored his first NHL goal. At first, he wore number 17, but when number 9 opened up, he took it. Not for luck, but because players with lower numbers got better trained berths on road trip. Number 9 meant better sleep and better play. It would become the most iconic number in hockey history. The rise of Mr. Hockey Howe's impact was immediate. He wasn't flashy, he was efficient, ruthless, and impossibly effective. He'd lean into defenders, roll his shoulder for space, slip the puck under a stick, and step through the gap he'd created. You couldn't play him rough, he'd hit back harder. You couldn't play him soft, he'd take your ice and your dignity. Gordie Howe didn't just play hockey, he solved it, but in 1950, everything nearly ended. During a playoff game, Howe was checked into the boards and hit head first. His skull fractured. Doctors performed emergency brain surgery just to save his life. Most players would never return. Gordie came back the next season and dominated, winning the scoring title by 20 points. It was as if that near-fatal injury had awakened something even stronger. That unbreakable spirit would define him forever. The Detroit Dynasty. The 1950s belonged to the Detroit Red Wings, and the Red Wings belonged to Gordie Howe. Detroit's famous production line of Howe, Sid Abel, and Ted Lindsay became one of the most feared lines in NHL history. They won 4 Stanley Cups, 1950, 1952, 1954, and 1955, and finished first in the standings 7 straight seasons. During that decade, Howe won 6 MVPs and 6 scoring titles. But it wasn't just the numbers, it was how he did it. This was the era of the original 6. Just 6 teams, brutal defense, no helmets, no mercy. Yet Howe dominated every night. His square-shouldered stance made him impossible to knock off the puck. Try to hit him, you'd get an elbow for your trouble. He became the first player in NHL history to reach 1,000 career points, a mark once thought untouchable. Even more impressive, he finished in the league's top 10 in scoring for 21 straight seasons. No one has matched that consistency since. The reluctant retirement after 25 seasons, Gordie's body began to protest. Arthritis ravaged his wrists, making it painful to even hold his stick. In 1971, he announced his retirement. He was immediately fast-tracked into the Hockey Hall of Fame, skipping the usual waiting period, a testament to his impact on the sport. Detroit offered him a front office job, hoping to keep him around. He took it, but the boardroom couldn't replace the ice. Gordie missed the grind, the decisions, the strategy, the competition. The man who thrived on game speed problem solving couldn't find the same thrill behind a desk, and that restlessness would soon change hockey forever. The unthinkable comeback. In 1973, the upstart World Hockey Association was desperate for credibility. The Houston Aeros pulled off something wild. They drafted Gordie's sons, Mark and Marty Howe, exploiting a loophole that let them play professionally. Then they made an offer no NHL team could match. Come play with your sons. At 45, Gordie Howe came out of retirement. Critics called it a stunt. They said it would embarrass his legacy. They were wrong. At 46, Gordie scored 100 points and won the WHA's MVP award. 2 years later, they renamed the trophy after him. He wasn't the fastest player anymore, but he was the smartest. He played hockey like chess, anticipating every move, conserving energy until the exact right moment to strike. Playing on a line with Mark and Marty, the Howes became one of the league's most effective units. Together, they led the Houston Aeros to back-to-back championships in 1974 and 1975. The father, the sons, and the game. In 1974, Howe represented Team Canada in a series against the Soviet Union at 46 years old, scoring 7 points in 7 games. A father competing alongside his sons on the same national team. It sounded like a fairy tale, but it was real. In Houston, the Howes did more than win. They built a hockey culture in a city that had never seen the sport before. The Aeros drew over 9,000 fans a night, outdrawing the NBA's Rockets. They proved that great hockey could win over any crowd, anywhere. When the Aeros eventually folded, the Howes joined the New England Whalers, where Mark transitioned to defense, a move that unlocked his Hall of Fame potential. Gordie kept producing, still dangerous, still elite. Back to the NHL in 1979, when the WHA merged with the NHL, 51-year-old Gordie Howe returned to the league that made him famous. He played all 80 games that season for the Hartford Whalers and scored 41 points, numbers good enough to outscore most players half his age. That year's All-Star game in Detroit gave fans a moment they'd never forget. When Howe took the ice, the ovation was deafening. Across the face-off circle stood 19-year-old Wayne Gretzky, the old master and the young prodigy. Howe picked up an assist that night, bridging hockey's past, present, and future in a single shift. 2 months later, he scored his 801st and final NHL goal, a record that stood for decades. And at 52 years and 10 days old, he became the oldest player ever to compete in the Stanley Cup playoffs, a legacy that refused to end. By the time he finally retired, Gordie Howe had played professional hockey in 5 different decades, the 1940s through the 1980s. Across the NHL and WHA, he amassed 975 goals and 2,358 points in 2,186 games. But even that wasn't the end. In 1997, at age 69, Gordie suited up for one final shift with the IHL's Detroit Vipers. Just 46 seconds of ice time, enough to extend his professional career into a 6th decade. The crowd's reaction said everything. Thunderous applause for a man who refused to let age, injury, or expectation define him. Epilogue: Gordie Howe wasn't just a hockey player. He was a standard, the living embodiment of toughness, humility, and endurance. He came from nothing, built an empire on effort, and redefined what was humanly possible in sport. They called him Mr. Hockey, and not because of the goals, the titles, or the trophies, but because he represented the heart of the game itself. Work hard, play fair, never quit. Even time couldn't beat Gordie Howe.